Hello, resilient Scorpio. Some chapters of your life do not announce when they begin releasing you. There is no dramatic goodbye, no unmistakable moment when everything suddenly changes. You simply notice that something which once had the power to pull you into deep emotional water can no longer reach quite as far inside you. And for some Scorpios, that strange quiet may feel like the first sign that a pattern carried for nearly 15 years is beginning to loosen. 15 is not a sentence written over your life, and it does not need to be treated as a promise from the stars. Think of it instead as a way of naming a long emotional season, one in which different people and circumstances may have awakened remarkably similar feelings. The relationship changes, the setting changes, the details look completely different, yet somewhere beneath the surface you recognize the same current. Have you ever wondered why certain experiences can feel familiar before you even understand what they are reminding you of? Maybe that familiarity has less to do with fate than with emotional memory. Scorpio can be remarkably sensitive to what lives underneath a situation, the hesitation behind a sentence, the slight change in someone's warmth, the question nobody answers directly. Over time, that sensitivity can become protective, teaching you to remember what others forget and to keep certain doors guarded until you understand exactly what happened. What begins as discernment can quietly become a habit of carrying unfinished stories far beyond the moment that created them. Perhaps you learned somewhere along the way that understanding everything made you safer. If you could read the room carefully enough, remember what had happened before, or recognize the smallest change in someone's behavior, maybe you could avoid being caught unprepared again. That instinct may have protected something tender in you for a very long time, and there is no need to dismiss the intelligence behind it. But a shelter built during one season can become confining when you continue living inside it after the weather has changed. This is where the idea of a 15-year karmic pattern becomes more interesting. Karma, in this story, does not have to mean punishment, bad luck, or some invisible authority keeping track of what you owe. It can simply describe what continues moving through your life because some part of it has never been fully examined, released, or given permission to become the past. Layer by layer, like sediment settling at the bottom of dark water, experiences accumulate until you can no longer tell which feelings belong to today and which ones have traveled forward from years ago. The pattern may not return wearing the same face. It might appear through a relationship that makes you wait for answers, a professional situation you remain invested in because you have already given it so much, or a conversation you continue replaying because something about it still feels unresolved. Different circumstances can touch the same hidden place, creating that unsettling sense that you have somehow been here before. What if the repetition is not asking you to endure the lesson again, but showing you the part of yourself that no longer wants to live by the same protective rules? When a cycle like this begins losing its hold, the first sign may be surprisingly ordinary. You may simply become tired of investigating what someone meant, tired of rehearsing the conversation that never happened, tired of waiting for an apology to make the past understandable. Even after sleeping, resting, or stepping away for a while, another kind of weariness can remain because the body is rested while the mind has continued reopening the same locked room. There is a particular exhaustion that comes from carrying a story long after you have run out of new things to learn from it, and that is where Scorpio's protective strength can become complicated. Holding on can feel like loyalty to another person, to the truth, or even to the version of yourself who survived what happened. If you loved deeply, trusted deeply, or invested years of yourself in something, releasing it can almost feel like saying those years meant nothing. So you keep one ember alive beneath the ashes, not necessarily because you want the old fire back, but because extinguishing it seems too close to erasing what it once meant. Yet meaning and attachment are not the same thing. You can honor what changed you without allowing it to keep directing you, and you can remember what happened without returning to it every time the present becomes uncertain. Perhaps this is why the current shift may feel less like a dramatic breakthrough and more like an unfamiliar absence of urgency. Something that once demanded an answer from you may still exist, but you no longer feel compelled to descend into the same depths every time it calls. That can be disorienting because an old defense practiced long enough eventually starts to resemble personality. If you have spent years watching closely, anticipating betrayal, protecting what is vulnerable, or searching beneath every silence for what has not been said. Who are you when you no longer need to do that with the same intensity? What remains when the locked room can finally stay closed without you standing outside it, listening for movement? Do you lose part of yourself? Or do you finally discover how much of yourself was occupied by guarding something that had already passed? This may be the deeper significance of the 15-year image. Perhaps those years were never measuring how long you were supposed to suffer. Perhaps they represent how long an emotional strategy could remain useful before you began to outgrow it. The deeper change is not that Scorpio suddenly stops remembering, caring, or feeling intensely, because those capacities can remain among your greatest strengths. What changes is the relationship you have with everything you carry, as you begin noticing that some memories can stay meaningful without continuing to have authority over where you go next. There is a difference, Scorpio, between protecting what matters to you and organizing your entire inner world around what once hurt you. From the outside, those two things can look almost identical because both can make you careful, observant, and selective about what you reveal. But inside, they feel very different. One gives you discernment, while the other keeps part of your attention stationed beside an old door, still listening for footsteps that may never return. The deeper work is not about bringing some missing piece into your life from outside. It is about noticing what you already carry and deciding whether every piece still deserves the same place within you. If something in that feels strangely familiar, comforting, and unsettling at the same time, it may be because you have sensed this shift before finding words for it. Sometimes recognition arrives that way, like your eyes adjusting in a dark room until objects that were always there slowly reveal their shape. And clarity can be fragile when it first appears, especially once ordinary routines begin filling the room again with their usual noise. That is why it matters to notice what is surfacing now instead of immediately pushing it back beneath everything you need to do. So tell me in the comments, where in your life have you been carrying something longer than you truly want to? Maybe it is a relationship you keep revisiting in your mind, a betrayal you still feel compelled to understand, a career chapter you cannot release because of everything you invested in it, or simply an old version of yourself you have protected for so long that it now feels inseparable from who you are. At what point does remembering become reopening, and when does a protective instinct become a habit you have learned to call your personality? That question reaches much closer to the heart of this 15-year pattern than any idea of cosmic punishment ever could. Because karma, viewed through this lens, does not require a judge somewhere beyond you, keeping a record of every wound, mistake, or unfinished conversation. It can be much quieter than that, a consequence continuing because the emotional mechanism that created it is still running beneath the surface. Deep water does not need anyone to command its currents. What enters it can travel farther than the eye can see, especially when the same current has been moving in one direction for years. In the same way, an old emotional response can keep shaping new experiences, even when the people who originally awakened it are no longer present. Think about the small moments that rarely seem important enough to call a pattern. You hear a change in someone's voice and immediately begin wondering what they are withholding, or an old name appears on your screen and your attention is pulled toward a story you thought you had already left behind. Someone disappoints you, and instead of simply registering what happened, part of you starts digging beneath it, searching for the missing motive, the hidden explanation, the piece that would finally make the whole thing make sense. None of these moments alone seems large enough to explain years of emotional exhaustion, and that is precisely why they can continue for so long without being recognized. Scorpio, there can be real intelligence in that instinct to look beneath appearances. It may have helped you notice inconsistencies others overlooked, protect yourself when trust was uncertain, or understand complicated situations before anyone was willing to speak openly about them. But a survival skill repeated long enough can quietly become an assignment you never consciously agreed to keep performing. You begin believing that every silence needs interpretation, every rupture needs a complete explanation, and every unfinished story must remain emotionally active until you finally understand exactly why it happened. That is where the 15-year image becomes useful, not as a fixed astrological law, but as a way of seeing accumulation. Imagine what can settle inside a person over that much time. Conversations replayed, questions left unanswered, loyalty extended beyond its natural season, anger preserved because releasing it seemed too much like excusing what happened. Each layer could be almost weightless when it first settles, like fine sediment drifting toward the bottom of a river. But after enough years, you may find yourself standing in emotional terrain, built partly from things that were never meant to remain permanent. And once you see that, the entire meaning of the cycle begins to change. If the pattern is not being imposed by some external force, then your relationship to it is not completely outside your influence either. This does not mean blaming yourself for what happened, pretending another person's choices did not matter, or forcing forgiveness before it feels genuine. It means recognizing that someone else may have created the wound, while you still have a say in how much territory that wound is allowed to occupy in the life you are living now. That distinction matters because Scorpio can sometimes mistake endurance for strength. You may tell yourself that you should be able to carry this because you have carried heavier things before, or that letting something affect you less somehow diminishes the seriousness of what happened. But resilience is not measured by how long you can remain emotionally attached to pain without collapsing. Sometimes resilience appears in a quieter form, realizing that you no longer need to keep touching the bruise to prove that it was real. Comparing your process with someone else's can make this even harder. Another person may appear to move forward quickly, while you are still trying to understand why a certain experience reached so deeply into you. But two people can pass through the same event and carry completely different histories into it. What looks like a single disappointment in the present may connect with older experiences of trust, abandonment, secrecy, loyalty, or control that give the moment far more emotional gravity. Judging yourself for feeling that weight only adds another layer to something you are already trying to understand. This is also why the pattern may reappear through completely different people. One relationship may involve waiting for someone to finally become emotionally honest. Another may involve staying psychologically connected to someone long after the relationship itself has changed. The faces are different, but the inner position can remain familiar, watching, remembering, waiting for one more piece of information before allowing yourself to release what happened. Without realizing it, you can keep returning to the same locked room, even though the furniture inside has changed. The same mechanism can follow you into work. You might stay attached to a role because you have already poured years into proving yourself there, keep trying to understand why your effort was overlooked, or remain committed to a project long after your deeper instincts tell you that the chapter has changed. Walking away can feel less like making a practical decision and more like abandoning everything you invested, as though leaving would somehow erase the value of what you gave. Yet the time you invested does not become meaningless simply because you choose not to invest more. And this may be one of the more difficult truths inside the whole pattern. Sometimes the thing keeping you attached is no longer love, loyalty, ambition, or even hope. Sometimes it is the belief that the past must eventually give you something back, a clear explanation, an apology, recognition, justice, or one final piece of truth that makes all those years feel properly accounted for. Waiting for that moment can keep an old chapter emotionally alive, even when your present life has already begun growing beyond it. You do not need the past to explain itself perfectly before you are allowed to stop carrying it. Perhaps that is where your attention belongs now. Not on forcing yourself to forget, but on noticing what you automatically reopen. Before returning to an old message, replaying the same conversation, checking for another clue, or descending once more into someone's motives, there can be a small pause in which you ask yourself something different. Is there genuinely something new for me to learn here? Or does returning simply feel more familiar than releasing? That pause may seem almost insignificant, yet it creates a space where an old reflex no longer gets to make every decision before you arrive. And what may be hardest to recognize is that releasing something does not make your depth disappear. You do not become less loyal because you stop carrying a relationship that has already changed, less perceptive because you no longer investigate every silence, or less powerful because an old wound no longer determines where your attention goes. The deeper distortion was never that you cared too much. It was allowing what once mattered to occupy permanent space simply because it had once earned a place there. And as that distinction becomes clearer, you may begin noticing just how much of your energy has been waiting inside rooms you no longer need to keep unlocked. There comes a point, Scorpio, when even the smallest disturbance can reach places that once seemed impossible to shake. A vague reply, a familiar tone, a question left hanging, or someone behaving just differently enough to make you notice can suddenly feel far more irritating than it would have before. You may even surprise yourself with the intensity of your reaction, wondering why something so minor has managed to get under your skin. But perhaps the sensitivity is not evidence that you are becoming weaker. Perhaps it is showing you how tired an old protective system has become. Think of scar tissue that has spent years protecting the same place. It formed for a reason, and for a long time it may have helped you move through the world without exposing everything underneath. Yet protection has its own limits, especially when it keeps responding to the present as though the original wound is still happening. Somewhere near the closing stretch of a long cycle, what once felt like strength can begin to feel strangely exhausting because your inner world is no longer willing to maintain the same level of vigilance. That may be one of the quieter signs surrounding this 15-year pattern. Things you once would have investigated for hours can start feeling tedious, and conversations you might once have replayed until every word had been examined begin to leave you with a different question. Why am I still giving this so much of myself? The answer does not always arrive immediately, but the question itself matters. It suggests that some part of you has already begun measuring the cost of keeping old emotional doors open. And there is a difficult paradox inside this, because Scorpio's instinct to look beneath the surface can be one of your greatest strengths. You may notice what other people miss, sense when words and actions do not quite match, and remember details that later reveal an important truth. But when that perceptiveness becomes constant surveillance of your own emotional world, you can spend enormous amounts of energy protecting yourself from something that is no longer happening. The guard remains at the gate long after the danger that trained the guard has disappeared. From the outside, almost none of this is visible. People may see someone composed, private, perceptive, perhaps even remarkably strong under pressure, while having no idea how much activity is taking place underneath that still surface. They do not see the conversation being replayed while you drive home, the unanswered message your mind keeps returning to, or the subtle shift in someone's behavior that you noticed 3 days ago and still have not dismissed. Deep water can look perfectly calm while currents continue moving below where anyone can see them. That invisibility is part of what allows the pattern to accumulate. One unanswered question does not seem like much. One disappointment can be absorbed, and one moment of suspicion may appear too small to matter. Yet layer after layer can settle like dark sediment on a riverbed, each experience resting quietly upon what came before it, until the depth itself begins to change. After enough time, you may no longer be reacting only to what is happening now. The present can brush against 15 years of accumulated meaning without announcing which layer it touched. Recognizing that can be uncomfortable because awareness makes the hidden weight visible. Automatic patterns can sometimes feel easier to carry before you understand exactly what they are costing you. Once you begin seeing how often your attention returns to what is unresolved, how much energy goes into interpreting silence, or how strongly you remain connected to situations that have already changed, it becomes difficult to call all of it simply intuition. Some of it may be intuition, but some may also be an old defense repeating the job it once learned to perform exceptionally well. And this is where the shift can begin without anything dramatic happening around you. You may still have the same relationships, the same memories, the same responsibilities, and even many of the same unanswered questions. Yet internally something starts moving into a different position because you become less willing to give every uncertainty unlimited access to your attention. The change begins almost invisibly, with the realization that understanding something and remaining emotionally bound to it are not the same act. That distinction can reshape relationships in ways you may not expect. When you stop chasing every unspoken explanation, some people may begin communicating with you more directly because you are no longer doing all the interpretive work for them. When you stop reopening a bond simply because it once mattered intensely, you may discover whether there is actually something alive between you now or only history holding the connection together. Some relationships can deepen under that new honesty, while others may grow quieter because they depended more heavily on the old emotional pattern than either person realized. That possibility can touch a very specific fear. If you stop watching so closely, will you miss something important? If you release what happened, does that mean the person who hurt you somehow gets away with it, or that the years you invested no longer count? And if you stop carrying someone inside you with the same intensity, does it mean you never truly loved them? These questions make sense because releasing an attachment can feel dangerously similar to erasing its meaning when you have spent years connecting depth with permanence. But something can matter profoundly without remaining active forever. A relationship can change you without receiving permanent access to your future, and a betrayal can teach you without requiring you to live indefinitely inside its aftermath. You can remember exactly what happened and still reach a point where you no longer need to investigate it for another hidden answer. The past does not become less real simply because your nervous system no longer responds to it as though it happened yesterday. This is where Scorpio's transformation becomes quieter than people often imagine. You do not need to burn your life down, cut everyone off, reveal every secret, or become suddenly indifferent to things you once cared about. Your depth does not need to disappear, and neither does your loyalty, perceptiveness, or instinct to protect what is precious. What changes is your willingness to ask whether those qualities are serving what is alive in your life now, or merely guarding something whose season has already passed. The practical shift may begin in a pause so small that nobody around you notices it. Before rereading the message, checking again, revisiting the argument, or descending into another round of wondering what someone really meant, you wait for a moment. Then you ask yourself, is there genuinely new information here for me, or am I reopening this because uncertainty feels harder to tolerate than familiarity? That question does not force you to release anything before you are ready. It simply gives your present self a chance to speak before an old reflex takes control. At first, you will not always catch the moment in time. There may be days when you realize an hour later that you have been replaying something you promised yourself you would leave alone, and other days when resisting the urge to check or investigate creates more discomfort than simply giving in to it. That does not erase the shift already taking place. Patterns built through repetition usually loosen through repetition too, one small interruption at a time. You may also discover that releasing vigilance produces its own kind of guilt. Part of you may wonder whether you are becoming careless, whether you are ignoring your instincts, or whether lowering your guard means inviting the same pain back into your life. But discernment and hypervigilance are not identical, just as remembering and remaining attached are not identical. The deeper skill is learning to recognize the difference while you are living it, rather than demanding perfect certainty before allowing yourself to move. Over time, that small pause can begin changing the emotional landscape beneath everything else. The old locked rooms may still exist in memory, but you no longer need to walk their hallways every night, checking whether anything has moved. The sediment of those years does not vanish from the riverbed, yet the water above it can begin flowing in directions that are no longer determined entirely by what settled there long ago. And perhaps that is what this 15-year shift is gradually asking of you. Not to become someone who feels less, but to discover what becomes possible when everything you have felt no longer has to follow you everywhere. What you've been calling 15 years of karma, Scorpio, may never have been a sentence hanging over your life. It may be closer to an internal tide, returning again and again until you could finally recognize what the water kept bringing back to shore. Not because you were destined to suffer through the same story, but because certain ways of protecting yourself remained active long after the experiences that created them had changed. And perhaps what you are beginning to hear now is something quieter than a prediction. You no longer need every old defense to accompany you into what comes next. Release does not mean becoming empty. It does not mean losing your memory, lowering every boundary, trusting without discernment, or pretending that painful experiences somehow did not matter. Something far subtler can happen when an old pattern loosens. You still remember, but remembering no longer automatically pulls you back into investigation. The depth remains. The compulsion to descend into it every time something stirs can begin to fade. There is an important difference between emotional stillness and emotional shutdown. Shutdown closes the door because feeling anything seems too dangerous, while genuine stillness can leave the door unlocked without needing to stand beside it all night. You can notice someone's distance without immediately constructing 10 explanations for it, and you can sense uncertainty without believing you must solve it before you are allowed to feel safe. Your perception is still alive. It simply begins responding from the present instead of constantly consulting an archive of everything that once went wrong. That may be one of the most meaningful changes available to Scorpio within this 15-year image. The years do not need to represent punishment, and they do not need to prove that some cosmic schedule has finally expired. They can represent the lifespan of an emotional strategy, something intelligent enough to protect you through one chapter, yet increasingly restrictive as you grew beyond the conditions that created it. There is dignity in recognizing that a defense can once have saved something precious in you and still become unnecessary later. You do not have to despise the person you were when you build those defenses. That version of you may have learned to watch carefully because details mattered, to remember because forgetting felt dangerous, or to hold tightly because losing something once carried consequences you never wanted to experience again. Those instincts may have helped you survive periods when certainty was scarce and trust had to be earned slowly. They deserve understanding, even as you begin deciding which of them still belong in the life taking shape around you now. And this is why change may arrive without a dramatic moment you can circle on a calendar. There may be no morning when you wake up and know with complete certainty that a 15-year cycle has closed. Instead, you notice a name you once could not see without feeling your body tighten, and this time it is simply a name. The memory is still there, but it passes through you like a shadow crossing deep water rather than becoming a current strong enough to pull you under. Another day, someone takes longer than expected to respond, and you notice the silence without immediately searching it for hidden meaning. You may still wonder, because sensitivity does not disappear simply because you are changing, but the wondering no longer consumes the entire room inside you. You continue with your afternoon, finish what you were doing, laugh at something unrelated, and realize later that you forgot to keep checking. Such a small thing could easily go unnoticed, yet it may reveal more than any dramatic declaration ever could. Or perhaps an old invitation returns in a new form. Once, familiarity alone might have been enough to draw you back, because unfinished stories can carry a powerful gravity, especially when part of you still hopes the next encounter will finally explain the previous one. This time, however, you pause before reopening the door. You ask whether there is actually something alive on the other side, or whether you are being called by an echo you have simply heard too many times to mistake for silence. That pause is where emotional authority begins taking a different shape. It is not the power to control another person's honesty, guarantee loyalty, predict disappointment, or uncover every hidden motive before it can hurt you. It is the quieter ability to remain connected to yourself when another person leaves something unresolved. You can prefer an answer without making your peace dependent upon receiving one. This distinction matters because Scorpio's depth was never the problem. Your capacity to care intensely, notice what lies beneath appearances, remain loyal to what matters, and remember what others overlook does not need to be stripped away in the name of healing. What changes is the amount of your future that those qualities are required to spend protecting your past. You begin discovering that depth can move forward too. It does not have to keep searching the same submerged places simply because they were once important. There is something almost poetic about using 15 years to describe such a process. 15 does not have to function as a magical deadline. It can become a marker for how long an old emotional strategy has traveled beside you, collecting memories and meanings until you finally become conscious of its presence. What seemed like one enormous karmic burden may reveal itself as hundreds of smaller repetitions layered over time. And once you can see the layers, you no longer have to treat them as one permanent part of your identity. So perhaps what is changing is not Scorpio itself, but a version of Scorpio that believed safety required, remaining emotionally prepared for what had already happened. That version of you does not need to be defeated, erased, or treated as though it made some terrible mistake. It learned from the information available at the time and kept watch because watchfulness once served a purpose. Now it may be discovering that it can loosen its grip without abandoning the wisdom it earned. The evidence will probably appear in ordinary places. You may stop rehearsing what you would say if someone from the past returned, or notice that you no longer need an apology before allowing yourself to enjoy the day in front of you. You may catch yourself beginning to analyze someone's silence and then decide there is nothing useful waiting at the bottom of that particular well. These moments can seem almost too mundane to call transformation, yet they are precisely where a deeply practiced pattern begins losing its authority. And some days the old instinct will still return. A familiar uncertainty may stir the sediment again, an old memory may suddenly feel close, or you may find yourself standing mentally outside a door you thought you had stopped visiting. That does not erase what has changed, because release is not proven by never remembering again. Sometimes it is revealed by how differently you respond when remembering happens. The deeper shift is that the past can remain part of your story without continuing to write every page that follows it. You can carry the knowledge without carrying the vigilance, preserve the lesson without preserving the wound in its original temperature, and honor what mattered without repeatedly reopening it to prove that it mattered. The water inside you can still be deep without always being turbulent. And as that distinction becomes more natural, Scorpio, you may find yourself with more attention available for whatever is quietly beginning to move through those waters now.